Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Crash by J.G. Ballard. Now, Crash was published in 1973. Now, J.G. Ballard is also the author of books like High Rise, Concrete Island, The Drowned World, The Atrocity Exhibition, Empire of the Sun, and many others. Now, James Graham Ballard, better known as J.G. Ballard, was an English author who was actually born in Shanghai in 1930 because his family lived in China at the time. And during the Second Sino-Japanese War, which would later become a part of World War II, James Ballard and his family were imprisoned in a Japanese-run internment camp in China. Now, Crash is one of the most controversial, divisive, and polarizing novels ever written. There are some people who consider this to be a masterpiece and a classic of literature, and then there are some people who view this as just pornography. Now, the plot of Crash is it follows a television producer named James Ballard. It's kind of funny how Ballard names the main character after himself, almost giving a sense of the novel being semi-autobiographical, even though the story itself is completely fiction, at least as far as I know. But Ballard, the character of Ballard, is in an open relationship with his wife. His wife sleeps around with other men, and possibly women as well, and he sleeps around with other women, and they're both cool with this, at least outwardly they're both cool with this, and they even ask each other about the different people that they fucked. But in the beginning of the story, Ballard gets into a horrible car accident in which the driver of the other car is killed, and both Ballard and the man's wife, a doctor named Helen Remington, are severely injured. But shortly after surviving this car crash, Ballard and Dr. Remington become involved in this group of car crash survivors, led by a former television scientist named Robert Vaughn, who are trying to achieve sexual gratification through car crashes, particularly gratification through the changes brought about to the human body depending on how severe the car crash is. Essentially, these people are fetishizing the reshaping of the human body through modern technology. And Ballard starts to become obsessed with Vaughn and tries to get his wife involved in this group. Meanwhile, Vaughn has been stalking actress Elizabeth Taylor because it's his ultimate fantasy to die in a car crash with her. I'm honestly not sure how I felt about J.G. Ballard's Crash. I thought it was a very good book. At the same time, I feel like this is a book that I appreciate and respect more than I outright love. Because, admittedly, it took me a while to get into the book. It actually took me about 100 or so pages to really get into the story. The thing is, though, the book only is 200 pages. But again, I'm glad I've read the book, and I've always maintained that if you are a reader, you should challenge yourself every once in a while. Now, some people have called Crash a science fiction novel, and I'm really not sure where I stand on that, because I've always maintained that genre can be a matter of opinion. The thing about Crash, though, is it seems to be set in the present, and there's no, futuristic technology. There's nothing, fantastical about it. At the same time, I would almost label it as almost like a metaphorical or thematic science fiction story where, on the surface, it's not science fiction, but it does deal with a lot of the themes of science fiction. This idea of technology reshaping sexuality, and it's also about how humans have had to adapt to technology rather than the other way around. So again, it's almost more of a thematic science fiction story than an outright science fiction novel. Now, I do gotta say, the book is very, very graphic, and I mean sexually graphic, and if you are, I don't want to use the word prude, but if you are somebody who doesn't really like things that get too vivid with the sexual details, like, you might not like this book because there are a lot of very detailed descriptions of the sex scenes to a point where I could see somebody reading this and thinking that it's just pornographic. So, needless to say, this is not a book for everybody, and if there is somebody watching this video right now who might be under 18, I certainly do not recommend the book for you. Now, on one level, you could look at the book as being about these very sexually dissatisfied people who are looking for new forms of sexuality. And I know at one point, J.G. Ballard called this a cautionary tale. At the same time, while reading the book, I never actually got a sense that Ballard was ever really judging any of these characters. Like, by no means is the book saying that the behavior that these characters are engaging in is healthy behavior. At the same time, it doesn't seem like Ballard is taking some moralistic stance on the characters. He's just kind of showing them as they are and kind of leaving it up to us to decide how we should feel about this. And on one level, you could look at it as, oh, this is horrible that these people actually fetishize car crashes. But on another level, you could almost look at it as being almost empowering for the characters, because these people, during their car crashes, like, that was the ultimate loss of control, and now by trying to stage these new car crashes and purposefully reshape their bodies through the car crashes, it's almost their way of taking back control. And the whole book is really about the dichotomy between sex and death and sex and violence. Another theme I saw in the book in terms of the sexuality is, okay, sex can be a beautiful and wonderful thing. Like, it could be a way for two people who love each other to show affection for each other. It could also be a way to procreate. At the same time, sex can also be a very destructive and terrible thing if it's non-consensual, if it's forced upon somebody. And all the characters in this book are people who are dealing with trauma because of their car crashes, and I almost saw the car crashes as being sort of a metaphor for rape. Like, it's the ultimate loss of control, and again, these characters are trying to take back control. The book also has sort of a commentary on celebrity culture and obsession with celebrity culture, like the fact that Elizabeth Taylor is a minor character in this novel, and the character of Robert Vaughn is obsessed with her and actually wants to die in a car crash with her. Again, there's sort of this commentary on obsession with celebrities and how in some ways celebrities have kind of become the new gods of our society. But again, Crash, it's a complicated book. It's a book that, again, I'm not really sure how I fully felt about it, but it is a book I recommend for the right people. But again, I wouldn't recommend this for anybody under 18, and also, if you're gonna read this book, know what you're getting yourself into. Now, as I said before, it's kind of debatable whether you call Crash a science fiction novel. Ballard is known for his more straight science fiction novels, and a lot of his science fiction stories had a huge influence on the cyberpunk genre. Like, he was a huge influence on William Gibson, but I could also see the influence of J.G. Ballard on people like Bret Easton Ellis and even Clive Barker. The novel has also had an influence on some music. There was a 1978 song called Warm Leverette by The Normal, which was based on this novel. There was a song called Miss the Girl by The Creatures, which was based on this book. There was also a song called Mausoleum by the band The Maniac Street Preachers, which was inspired by this book. The song Down in the Park by Gary Newman does include some Ballard references, and there is a line in the song, "I was in a car crash or was it the war, but I've never been quite the same," which almost seems like it could have been taken from Crash a little bit. Now, there were two film adaptations of this book. One was a 1986 short film called Nightmare Angel, which was actually an unauthorized adaptation, but that one was pretty interesting. interesting. It actually had Bill Moseley in the Robert Vaughn role, even though the character wasn't called Robert Vaughn in the short film. But more famously, this book was adapted into the 1996 film of the same name, which was written and directed by David Cronenberg, the same David Cronenberg who directed films like Scanners, Videodrome, The Brood, Shivers, The Dead Zone, the 1986 remake of The Fly, and Dead Ringers. Now, the movie Crash is actually remarkably faithful to the book, which is interesting because according to an interview I saw with David Cronenberg that was recorded at the time the movie came out, he said that he actually wrote the script for the movie 4 years after reading the book. So it's interesting how there are some lines in the movie that are taken almost word for word from the book. Now, the movie does change some things. For example, the book is set in London, whereas the movie is set in Toronto, Canada. Also, the whole subplot with Elizabeth Taylor is completely cut out of the movie, which made sense for the time the movie came out, and Cronenberg himself even said this, that by the 1990s, when the movie was made, Elizabeth Taylor was not really the icon that she was back in 1973 when the book was first published, so it makes sense that they wouldn't have her or a character based on her in the movie. Instead, what you get in the movie is sort of a heavier emphasis on the characters reenacting certain car crashes that famous celebrities have died in, like the car crashes that killed James Dean or Jane Mansfield. Now, the movie Crash was ridiculously controversial. Like, there were several newspapers in England that actually tried to get the movie banned in England. Ted Turner actually tried to get the movie, like, he couldn't legally ban the movie in the United States, obviously, but he tried to block the film's release in the United States. A lot of people were really pissed off by the movie. Now, one of the film's more controversial elements is there's a character in both the book and the movie named Gabrielle who's crippled. In the movie, she's played by Rosanna Arquette, and a lot of people were offended by how sexualized this character is, and David Cronenberg told a pretty funny story on the commentary for the film that's on the Criterion Blu-ray. He told a story about how some journalist wrote a whole article about how offended he was about how sexualized the character was, and it actually backfired on him because a lot of people in the disabled community were basically like, what, we can't be sexual? Now, the movie starred James Spader as James Ballard, Deborah Kara Unger as Ballard's wife Catherine, Holly Hunter as Helen Remington, like I said, Rosanna Arquette as Gabrielle, and then you had Elias Koteas, who I always recognize best as Thomas Daggett from The Prophecy, who freaking stole the movie as Robert Vaughn. Now, while the film has a lot of really graphic sex scenes, oddly enough, one of the most controversial scenes in the movie, and I think it's so stupid that the scene was as controversial as it was, but there's a scene in the movie where James Ballard, the James Spader character, and Robert Vaughn kiss, and then you don't see it, but it is implied that they have sex, and people, like, according to David Cronenberg, you had certain, like, homophobic people who were just walking out of the theater because of that scene, which, to me, says way more about those people than the actual movie. But then you had, oddly enough, people in the gay community who didn't like that scene because they felt like it wasn't graphic enough. But I think what Cronenberg was going for with that is that was really the only tender moment between any of the characters in the movie. Now, I've seen some comments saying that Crash is not your typical Cronenberg movie, and I'm like, do you not understand what the thematic elements of Cronenberg's work actually are? I mean, the whole story is about people who fetishize the reshaping of the human body by modern technology. That whole concept is pure Cronenberg. It's just not as on the nose about it as something like Videodrome, but to be honest, I think Videodrome and Crash have a lot of thematic similarities. Now, I do want to point out that there is a 2004 film called Crash. That is a completely different movie. It has nothing to do with the David Cronenberg film or the book at all. But what's funny about that movie is when it came out, David Cronenberg actually took it as a personal insult that that movie called itself Crash. But yeah, that was my review on Crash by J.G. Ballard, and bye.